I'm Debra Band, here with Susan Gillingham. We are creating together an enormously exciting and important work on the Psalms, focused on sharing the ways that Christians and Jews each interpret these beloved poems. In these days of deep divisions in society, we find this work deeply compelling. Today, we're sharing with you a talk about this project that we presented recently at the 2025 Society for Biblical Literature International Conference in Boston. One day in second grade in my 1960s Chattanooga, Tennessee public elementary school, I noticed one of my friends, a little girl whose family had only recently come down to the city from the rural Smoky Mountains, staring intently at my head. "What's wrong? What are you looking at?" I asked. And my friend replied that her mother had urged her to look for my Jewish horns. Now, long ago as that mother's suspicion was, it illustrates at the very least a mutual unfamiliarity that still often divides Christian and Jewish communities from one another. Such unfamiliarity contributes to anti-Semitism in the former and an embattled fortress in the latter. At the street level, the often tortured relationship of Christianity and Judaism since the gradual separation of the two belief systems in the 2nd century CE has resulted from profound misunderstandings and stereotypings of each other's beliefs and practices, and fed deep senses of mutual threat and distrust across the Western world, whether through the internet or our own community institutions, poisoning our societies and everyday interactions. But if we communicate our actual beliefs without attempting to persuade each other to adopt our own religions, but simply explaining and demystifying ourselves to one another, we hope to diminish the distrust and soothe the anger underlying the conspiracy theories that so often divide us. A phrase of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, "The Dignity of Difference," from the title of his 2002 book, pleading that religious conversation should replace violence in our globalized world, suggests an attitude that can help heal these divisions through interreligious dialogue.
A potent way of testing honest and open discourse is a side-by-side reading of the Book of Psalms. This isn't entirely new. Over the last 25 years, several conferences have been hosted in Europe, the UK, and America, where the focus has been on Jews and Christians discussing together the Book of Psalms in order to encourage a constructive interfaith dialogue. I think of Der Psalter in Judentum and Christentum, written from the proceedings of a conference in Münster in 1997, of Psalms in Community, Jewish and Christian textual, liturgical, and artistic traditions, from a conference in Yale in 2002, Jewish and Christian approaches to the Psalms from the SBL International Meeting in Vienna in 2007, and a publication entitled Jewish and Christian Approaches to the Psalms, Conflict and Conversions, from a conference I hosted in Oxford in 2010. Similar symposia have been hosted in Jerusalem, Budapest, and Durham. What is extraordinary is that to date, there has not been one single collaborative Jewish-Christian commentary on the Book of Psalms. It was after a paper on my 3-volume project, Psalms Through the Centuries, at SBL in San Antonio in November 2023, and after a review I did of Debra's extraordinary work on the visual exegesis of Kohelet, that she and I decided we ought to try to bring together our mutual skills in a shared visual commentary on the Psalms. That was in 2023. And now we offer you one example of the fruits of our work. We've chosen some 18 Psalms about creation, partly because these have a rich resonance in each of our faith traditions, and partly because the focus on God as creator and humankind as accountable for this gift of creation allows for a more Arenic approach, whereby neither of us asserts the superiority of our own point of view, instead recognizing the integrity of our differences.
Visual interpretation can play a vital part in interreligious dialogue. Illuminated manuscripts have been a traditional medium for conveying the power and beauty of the Psalms across Western cultures since the advent of the bound book, and my paintings share many of the physical characteristics of medieval and early modern Jewish and Christian prayer books and psalters: ink, gold, and gouache on finest catskin vellum. This practice, crafting visual interpretations of traditional Jewish texts, is a common theme in all my earlier books. But here, there are distinctive challenges whereby the visual metaphor, iconography in art historical terms, has to convey the spiritual value of not one, but two religious traditions that are often contradictory, even mutually exclusive. In our visual age, increasingly visual age, when the word icon has sprung far from its roots in religion and art history into everyday conversation, a vibrant religious visual vocabulary able to convey complex, abstract, philosophical, ethical, and spiritual ideas in a glance, using imagery rooted in millennia of diverse Christian and Jewish sources, acquires a new relevance, both heightening the drama and emotions of the text and helping to explain the way that each of our traditions understands the psalm. The essence of our message also lies in the graphic design of the commentaries that follow each illuminated psalm. After the psalm's illuminations, we offer two essays explaining how Jews and Christians read the psalm through their different but rather interrelated, rich and complex reception histories. The visual placement of these essays is vital, for they express explicitly that idea of the dignity of difference. The two commentaries are placed not one above the other, which might tacitly express some idea of superiority or dominance, but side by side, equal in value and accessibility. We offer you here one example from Psalm 8. Here you will see, both in art and word, how we can draw honey from the rock together.
First, a word about Psalm 8 as a whole. It's the first hymn in the Psalter, and its praise of God as creator, looking outwards towards the starry sky, contrasts starkly with the more inward-looking psalms and personal struggles of faith found in Psalms 3 to 7, and also in Psalms 9 to 14 following Psalm 8. This is an evening hymn, as seen in the reference to the moon and the stars in verse 4. There are several correspondences throughout Psalm 8 with Genesis 1, especially verses 14 to 19. Although there, God creates through divine commands, and God said, "Let there be," and here, God creates with his fingers and hands, as we see in verses 4 and 7. Psalm 8 has a chiastic structure. Between the two identical refrains, in verses 2 and 10, outlined in green here, the heart of the psalm concerns God's glory revealed in humankind, as stated in verses 5 and 6. Before this affirmation of our humanity, in verses 3 to 4, we read of God's glory within the great cosmos. After verses 5 and 6, we read of God's glory in the natural world, as in verses 7 to 9. The order in the structure of the psalm, from the cosmos to humanity to the world of nature, emulates the order within God's creation, which is the key theme in this psalm.
Let me introduce the Jewish commentary on the psalm by sketching its theology. Given our time constraints here, I can only paint this in broad brushstrokes for you, although the book will go into significantly more detail. In Jewish tradition, the psalmist's verses in this 8th psalm ring out an exuberant celebration of creation and joy in humankind's powerful place, just a little lower than the angels, yet utterly and joyfully subject to God, all evident in the glory of the night sky. The divine ability to thwart Israel's enemies, the psalmist further exalts, is proof of the providential God's infinite mastery over the created world. Inspired by the grandeur of the nighttime heavens, the psalmist joyfully balances humanity's comparative insignificance, with the remarkable ability with which God has endowed us to enjoy, indeed command, the fruits of all creation. These powers not only crown us with glory and honor, but also further exalt God's omnipotence. The psalmist mentions the gittit, most likely a musical term, but the word can also be understood as winepress. And so the early rabbis also associated it with both Judaism's 3 harvest festivals, as well as to another aspect of divine providence, the crushing of enemies such as Babylonia and Rome, enabling redemption of Israel's land and people. The psalm celebrates God's generosity in sharing wisdom with humankind, as well as God's confidence that we can use it well. In the Hebrew Bible, wisdom encompasses not only intellectual command of psychological, metaphysical, philosophical, or theological concepts, but also practical skills embodied in material skills and crafts. Think of God's praises of Bezalel, who crafted the traveling tabernacle. I've endowed him with a divine spirit of wisdom, ability, and knowledge in every kind of work. This is from Exodus 31. At a heavenly level, Lady Wisdom of Proverbs 8 recounts how she is God's precious nursling, how humankind, but how humankind is her beloved playmate. At creation, she declares, then I was by him as a nursling. I was daily his delight, playing always before him, playing with the universe, his earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. And back down on earth, the Ode to Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 31, part of the traditional Jewish Friday evening dinner table service, focuses on this ideal woman's skills at household and even business management. Overall, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the Torah of steadfast love. Midrash probes the heights of wisdom bestowed upon mortal humans and suggests an angelic competition with mortal man, who's represented by Adam. The angels ask incredulously, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And God replies that humankind will be wise. God demonstrates Adam's superior wisdom by proving that while Adam can name all the animals in creation, the heavenly host cannot. Similarly, the rabbis imagine the angels challenging humankind's competence to exercise divine wisdom, the Torah, in the earthly sphere, questioning, what is man that thou art mindful of him? God answers that the Torah can only be fulfilled by God's beloved human creations on earth, not in heaven at all. So let's turn now to the Jewish visual interpretation of the psalm here. The royal crown, crafted in rich blue and gold, expresses the radical awe, as Heschel would have said, in contemplating God's dominion over heaven and earth. In Jewish mystical and poetic traditions, the royal crown, Keter Malchut in Hebrew, immediately summons not only the royalty, but also the wisdom at the highest level of the Godhead. Jewish mystical tradition suggests that all existence emanates ultimately from God's loftiest, most secret emanation, Keter, or crown. The palmette imagery employs a pattern contemporary with those palm designs described in the first temple. God's earthly palace summons the sacred spaces where the Psalms were first chanted. On the text page, the 2 initial words sparkle together with a golden diadem, again a symbol of both divine and human royalty. The micrographic border offers a design of palmettes and grapevines, composed of the English of the 8th and 9th chapters of Proverbs. Given the feminine gender of the Hebrew word for wisdom, chokhmah, the text, like much of Proverbs, characterizes divine wisdom as an all-competent woman, the bridge between the divine and material worlds, who teaches humankind, like a child, to obey the divine law that she represents. Grapes have always suggested joy and sanctification in Jewish tradition, but here the winepress idea, the gittit, suggested by the grapes, also alludes, as we saw a moment ago, to divine judgment against Israel's enemies. And again, we have the palmette design shown on the crown and in the micrography, which relates to the palm designs described in Kings and Chronicles in the decoration of the temple. Let's examine the golden crown supported by both male and female hands. Its harp-shaped micrographic border continues the Hebrew Proverbs 8 and associates the crown with King David. The grapevines and olive branches in the high crown suggest divine and human leadership and nobility in several psalms and across Jewish tradition. At the top of the crown, the two little round cartouches present a miniature painting of the cosmos, adapted from this famous 2014 Hubble Space Telescope image of the ultra-deep field of space and the full moon. The two are surrounded by words of verse 4, alluding to the vial of paper bearing this verse that American astronaut Buzz Aldrin placed on the lunar surface. The crown's velvet cap presents a miniature earthly landscape illuminated by the moon and stars in the night sky, shining down upon a scene of land and ocean. The heavens sparkle with faraway astronomical sights inspired by the imagery of the deep cosmos captured in that Hubble image I just showed you. The glow of the stars and moon illuminate the wonders of the created world, its animals and human activities. A waterfall plunges down the mountainside, alluding to prophetic metaphors comparing Torah to flowing water, as well as the Kabbalistic metaphor describing how the divine emanation of wisdom, Chokhmah, flows from the highest, most hidden aspects of God downward until it reaches the material world and finally appears as water, a ubiquitous metaphor for Torah. In the foreground at right, beneath the image of Jerusalem, a woman cradles her new baby, alluding to the continuation of human life despite challenge, promised in verse 3. The crown's fur rim bears the band of alternating pomegranates and bells described for the garments of the high priest and in Exodus and later in the temple. Those male and female hands supporting the crown are those of the king and queen. Drawing upon associations of olives with royalty and the priesthood across the Hebrew Bible, the olive branches embroidered on the sleeves suggest the monarch's establishment as Israel's leader at dominating and caring for God's wondrous creation.
In our actual commentary, I offer a wide-ranging account of the history of Christian interpretation of the psalm. Here, I'm going to be much more brief. As well as reading from the Hebrew, the Greek and Latin translations are central in Christian readings. For example, in verse 1, the Greek translation adds another heading. It is eos to telos, meaning for the end. You can see it highlighted here. And it suggests to Christian commentators both the first coming and then the second coming of Jesus Christ, giving purpose to history. Verse 3 is cited as an implicit prophecy in Matthew 21, where Jesus rides into Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday. Much is made in Christian tradition of verses 5 and 6, first by the New Testament writers, especially the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, and then later by the early church fathers. Verse 5, for example, is read about the human and divine nature of Jesus Christ, who is both man, anthropos, and the coming Son of Man, huios anthropos. Verse 6, yet thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, par angelus in the Greek, is understood to be about Christ, who, in the humility of his incarnation, was made less than the angels, but then, after the resurrection, was crowned with glory and honor above the angels. Hence, in Christian tradition, a psalm of creation can also become a psalm of redemption. In Christian liturgy, Psalm 8 is thus used for Ascension Day, Palm Sunday, Easter, the Feast of Transfiguration, and at Christmas. This is a good illustration of the way that Christians have given an additional Christological layer to this hymn of creation. Little is made of the link in Christian tradition of the themes of Torah and creation, and also Little is made of the link between divine wisdom as an agent of creation, which actually misses important concerns about the potential order within the cosmos, within humanity, and within the natural world, expressed within Psalm 8, taken up in Jewish tradition. As for my own response to the visual representation of the psalm, I think we need the visual representation here. The crown.
Sorry.
That's fine. As for my own response to the visual representation of this psalm, again, I must be brief. I was first intrigued by the emphasis on the moonrise, with the intimate view of the lunar landscape, because this reminded me too of the way in which part of this psalm was embedded in the Earth's crust on the first lunar landing, and then all of it read to the world's media by Buzz Aldrin as the rocket returned to Earth. And then I became fascinated with the other intimate details of creation: the land and the city, the seas and the mountains, the dolphins and the waterfall. There were allusions to Genesis 1 too, which I could see, which illustrated actually how Torah and creation are intimately bound together in their understanding of order in the universe. The presence of the temple also made me think in the allusions to the high priesthood and the palms and the pomegranates and the olive and the fruit for anointing. It made me reflect that the probable setting for the singing of the psalm was perhaps at harvest time, actually in the temple. The harp is an interesting addition. On the one hand, we have allusions to gitit in the heading as a wine press, but gitit can also mean a harp, suggesting this is a corporate musical psalm to be sung, not a psalm just for private meditation. And Christians sing this psalm in their churches too. Humanity has a specific role in creation and in Psalm 8, and Debra has made much of this. I saw the female touch in the attention given to the woman and the baby, as in verse 2. Initially, I viewed the hands that hold the crown as human hands and considered whether these were not just the hands of any human or even specifically royal hands. The Davidic heading over Psalm 8 also allowed me, as Debra has seen, to take up a kingly reading. The crown which is given to David, therefore, is given to all humanity. But I did wonder whether, with reference to God's fingers in verse 3 and God's hands in verse 6, whether those hands and fingers bearing up the crown might also suggest something more than human hands, and even more than the hands of the king. They also imply, dare I say it, those of God. This is a provocative thought, and has a good deal of bearing on the Christian commentary tradition in the psalm.
Before going on to share our idea of the graphic presentation of each psalm's materials, let's compare and contrast our two religions' readings of Psalm 8. In Judaism, the Hebrew psalm is understood literally as a song of praise of the providential creator. Humankind is described by the Hebrew term Ben Adam, son of man, a common synonym for mortal humans in late Hebrew biblical texts. Some rabbinic midrashic traditions emphasize the theme of divine protection by an allegorical interpretation of the word gitit, meaning winepress, that will harvest by crushing the nations that endanger Israel, instead of its literal meaning as a musical instrument or perhaps musical instruction.
And so early Christian interpretations, mainly based on the Greek and Latin translations, developed specifically Christological readings of the additional Greek heading in verse 1 and of the children's praise in verse 3, but most especially of the middle verses 5 and 6 of the psalm. As noted earlier, less is made of the associations between creation and Torah and between creation and wisdom. Nevertheless, Jewish and Christian readings combine with the psalmist in their wonder at the splendor of the night sky, the vast night sky which God created. Together we celebrate the intimations of humankind's importance embedded in the starlit cosmos, whether our traditions focus on the coming of one individual who is deemed to be both divine and human, or, more universally, on our uniquely gifted earthbound selves.
We've explained now how the Illuminations interpret the psalm. So let me share with you now the graphic layout that will express the idea of the dignity of difference in the Jewish and Christian readings of this psalm. For each psalm, you'll find several sections. First, the illuminations are presented in a full spread, as you see here. Each psalm's illuminations will then be followed directly by its commentary materials, starting with the typeset text of the psalm in Hebrew and English. I should add here that at least most of the translations will come from the Koran Jerusalem Bible, a translation by Harold Fish based ultimately on the King James edition, with slight editing and Hebraizations of personal and place names. After the texts, we have our brief introduction to the psalm, as you can see, and then begin the two side-by-side columns of Jewish and Christian commentary. We color code these consistently through the book so that readers always know which tradition's interpretations they're reading. The commentaries begin with an exploration of each tradition's ideas of theological issues raised within the psalm. We move through the commentaries, in this case, continuing the theology, and then move to the visual interpretation of the psalm embodied in the paintings according to the often dramatically different readings in Jewish and Christian traditions. Finally, each psalm section ends with a brief essay comparing and contrasting the Jewish and Christian approaches to the psalm as interpreted within these paintings.
In this way, we seek to demonstrate through our readings of Psalm 8, and indeed of other creation psalms which we have chosen, that mutual respect can encourage interreligious dialogue, as well as opening up a new awareness of the other's faith. This is very much work in progress, and we very much hope that in due course we will continue to share Debra's illustrations and our joint commentaries about other psalms of creation, which we've already written. We've at least 4 of those. Meanwhile, we hope that you now understand why this project both excites and indeed inspires both of us.
Thank you.